Born into a world that wanted you dead. The moment a human is born today, the world bends, slightly, quietly, but unmistakably, to protect that fragile life. Lights are bright, hands are gloved, machines hum softly, and strangers whose only job is to save you rush into action. But for almost all of human history, birth was not a beginning filled with promise. It was an entry into danger. It was the start of a brutal negotiation with a world that did not care whether you lived or died. To be born as a human for most of history was not a gift, it was a test, and most failed it. Imagine being born into a world where survival itself was rare. Not difficult, rare. A world where half of all children never reached adulthood. Where parents did not name their children immediately, not because of tradition, but because naming someone who would likely die felt like tempting fate. In such a world, love existed, but it was cautious, restrained, almost fearful, because attachment often ended in grief. History does not record the cries of mothers who buried their third or fourth child. It does not remember fathers who watched their family line quietly disappear. But these stories were not exceptions. They were the rule. This is the uncomfortable truth modern humans rarely confront. Most people who ever lived experienced lives dominated by suffering. Not heroic suffering, not meaningful hardship, but grinding, endless pain caused by hunger, disease, violence, and ignorance. And in some periods, conditions were so extreme that being born during them meant inheriting a near certain death. No ambition, intelligence, or courage could save you. Your fate was sealed the moment and place you entered the world. Long before written history, before empires and borders, human existence itself was fragile. Early humans lived at the mercy of nature in its rawest form. Cold killed silently, heat killed slowly, predators killed violently. A broken bone was not an injury, it was a death sentence. A tooth infection could spread into the brain. A small wound could rot into gangrene. There was no medicine, no surgery, no understanding of the body. Pain was not treated, it was endured until it ended you. Now imagine being born into a tribe already struggling to survive. Food was not guaranteed. Winters were unforgiving. Droughts meant starvation. If you were weak, sick, or born with any disability, the group faced an impossible choice: invest scarce resources into you or abandon you to save the rest. Many cultures practiced infanticide, not out of cruelty, but desperation. Survival demanded it. To be born human was to be immediately measured against usefulness. As civilizations formed, life did not become safer, it became more dangerous in new ways. Agriculture allowed population growth, but it also introduced famine on a massive scale. A failed harvest no longer affected dozens, it killed thousands. Cities concentrated people, and with them came disease. Filth, waste, and contaminated water turned settlements into breeding grounds for invisible killers. Humans had no idea what germs were. They blamed spirits, gods, curses, and stars. Meanwhile, children died screaming from illnesses no one could name. Childbirth itself was one of the deadliest moments in human life. Women routinely died giving birth. There were no sterile tools, no pain relief, no emergency procedures. A baby born alive often meant a mother dead. Sometimes both died. Pregnancy was not celebrated, it was feared. To be born meant someone else may have had to die for you to exist. And if you survived infancy, your problems were just beginning. Childhood was not a protected stage of life. There were no schools for most, no toys, no safety. Children worked, children fought, children starved. They were sent into mines, fields, and factories long before their bodies were ready. Injury meant death. Exhaustion meant replacement. Human life was cheap, not because people lacked emotion, but because loss was constant. When death is everywhere, mourning becomes a luxury. There were times in history when entire generations were born directly into catastrophe. Climate shifts caused decades of cold and darkness. Volcanic eruptions blotted out the sun. Crops failed across continents. Food chains collapsed. Humans turned on each other. Archaeological evidence shows periods where violence spiked so dramatically that skeletons from entire regions bear signs of trauma. These were not wars between armies, these were desperate fights for survival. And then came organized violence. The invention of states and empires did not reduce suffering for the average human, it intensified it. Power concentrated at the top, while pain spread below. Kings lived in luxury while peasants lived one failed harvest away from death. Taxes were brutal. Punishments were public and horrific. Law existed not to protect life, but to enforce obedience. A wrong word, a wrong belief, or simply being born into the wrong class could destroy you. Imagine being born a peasant in medieval Europe. Your life expectancy was low, your freedom non-existent. You would work from childhood until death. You would never leave the land you were born on. Your body belonged to your lord. Your crops could be seized. Your daughters could be taken. If war came, and it always did, you would be the one whose home burned, whose food was stolen, whose family starved. Armies marched on peasant suffering. Disease thrived in these conditions. And when disease arrived, it did not discriminate, but the poor suffered most. A fever could wipe out entire villages. A cough could empty a city. And people had no defense, no understanding, no hope. There are moments in history where suffering peaks so violently that even historians struggle to fully comprehend them. Periods where death was not an event, it was the background noise of daily life. Bells rang constantly for funerals. Streets were lined with corpses. Children grew up surrounded by decay. To be born during such times was to be born into a world already collapsing. One of the most terrifying aspects of these eras was not just death, but uncertainty. People did not know why the world was killing them. They did not know if tomorrow would exist. Fear was total. Faith often deepened, but so did paranoia. Communities searched for someone to blame. Minorities, outsiders, the sick, the different, many were massacred simply to give suffering a face. And yet, humans kept being born. Life continued not because it was safe, but because biology demanded it. New children entered worlds that could barely support those already alive. Each birth was another mouth to feed, another body exposed to danger. Hope persisted, even when logic said it shouldn't. This is what makes the question so disturbing. When was the worst time to be born as a human? Because the answer forces us to admit something uncomfortable, that progress is recent, fragile, and rare. That safety is the exception, not the rule. That the human story is not one of steady improvement, but long stretches of darkness interrupted by brief moments of light. Part 1 is not about choosing a single year or century yet. It is about understanding the baseline reality of human existence for most of history. Before plagues with names, before wars with dates, before genocides we can list, there was a simple, horrifying truth: being born human was already dangerous enough. And in the next part of this story, we will enter the eras where that danger exploded into something far worse, when nature and humanity combined to create living hells so extreme that survival itself became almost unnatural. When the world itself turned against you. If part 1 was about understanding how fragile human life always was, part 2 is where that fragility shatters completely. This is where history stops being merely harsh and becomes openly hostile. These are the eras when being born was not just risky, but cruel, when the world seemed actively designed to erase you. Not through a single disaster, but through a perfect storm of plague, famine, ignorance, and fear, all colliding at once. In these moments, survival was not about strength or intelligence. It was about blind luck. Imagine being born into a world where death was not an interruption to life, but its constant companion. Where you did not ask if someone would die today, only who. This was the reality during humanity's darkest collapses, when systems failed, nature turned unpredictable, and society dissolved into desperation. Entire civilizations didn't just decline. They fell apart slowly, painfully, and publicly, dragging millions of innocent lives with them. One of the most devastating truths about these eras is how helpless people were. Today, when disaster strikes, we expect explanations. We demand causes. We search for solutions. But in the past, humans stood naked before catastrophe, with no knowledge and no defenses. When crops failed, no one knew why. When disease spread, no one understood how. When children died, there were no answers, only prayers whispered into the dark. Consider famine, not as a temporary shortage of food, but as a prolonged state of existence. There were periods in history when famine lasted years, even decades. People were born into hunger and never knew a full stomach their entire lives. Bodies adapted by shrinking, weakening, breaking. Children grew up stunted, both physically and mentally. Hunger rewired the human brain. Morality eroded. Neighbors became competitors. Parents faced choices no human should ever face. Which child might survive longer? Which might die sooner? Which sacrifice could buy the others another day? Historical records from these periods are chilling. They speak of people eating grass, bark, leather, rats, insects. Then pets. Then the dead. And finally, sometimes, each other. Cannibalism was not madness. It was the final stage of starvation. To be born during such a famine was to be born into a slow-motion execution, one bite at a time. And famine rarely arrived alone. Disease followed hunger like a shadow. Malnourished bodies were easy targets. Immune systems collapsed. Minor illnesses became fatal. Entire regions were transformed into open-air graveyards. There were no hospitals as we understand them, no quarantines that worked, no medicines that healed. Doctors often made things worse. Bloodletting weakened patients. Superstitious treatments spread infection. The sick were abandoned out of fear. Now imagine being born during one of history's great plagues, not knowing that the air you breathe, the water you drink, even the touch of another human might kill you. The Black Death was not just a disease, it was a psychological apocalypse. People woke up healthy and went to bed dead. Children watched parents collapse. Parents buried children in mass graves. The sound of coughing became a sound of terror. Cities emptied. Trade stopped. Farms were abandoned. Corpses piled up faster than they could be buried. In many places, the living fled, leaving the sick to rot. Entire bloodlines ended in a matter of weeks. To be born during this time was to be born into a world already dying, a world where hope itself had been infected. And because people did not understand disease, they searched for someone to blame. Fear turned into violence. Minorities were accused of poisoning wells. Outsiders were slaughtered. Innocent people were burned alive to satisfy the desperate need for control. Being born different, a different religion, ethnicity, or appearance, could get you killed without trial. Survival depended not only on health, but on fitting in perfectly. For children born into these eras, innocence offered no protection. They were not shielded from horror, they were immersed in it. They saw bodies dragged through streets. They smelled death daily. Trauma was not an exception, it was the environment. Many children grew up emotionally numb, because feeling deeply was unbearable. Others broke completely. What makes these times uniquely horrifying is that they often represented total collapse. Governments failed. Laws vanished. Order disintegrated. When authority disappears, the strongest take what they want. Violence becomes normal. Women and children become targets. To be born during societal collapse meant growing up in a world where nothing restrained cruelty. Even faith, which often offered comfort, became twisted. Some believed the end of the world had arrived. Others believed suffering was deserved. Extremism flourished. Self-flagellation, mass hysteria, and cult-like movements spread rapidly. When people lose control over their lives, they grasp for meaning anywhere, even if it destroys them. There is something especially cruel about being born at the wrong moment in history. You do nothing to deserve it. You do not choose your century, your country, your circumstances. And yet those choices define everything. Two humans born genetically identical, separated only by time, can experience lives so different they might as well belong to different species. One lives in safety, the other in horror. These catastrophic eras remind us that progress is not guaranteed. History does not move upward smoothly. It collapses, violently and unpredictably. And when it collapses, it crushes the newest and weakest first. By the end of these dark ages, humanity was changed. Populations were reduced. Knowledge was lost. Trauma lingered for generations. Entire ways of life vanished. But the dead did not get to see recovery. The children born into those nightmares did not get second chances. Their lives were consumed by circumstances beyond imagination. And yet, as horrifying as plagues and famines were, there were still periods in history where being born was even worse, not because nature failed, but because humans perfected suffering. Born into human-made hell. If nature showed humanity how fragile life could be, humans themselves showed how endlessly cruel it could become. There were times in history when the greatest danger to a newborn child was not disease, hunger, or cold, it was other human beings. These were eras where suffering was no longer accidental or mysterious. It was organized, planned, systematic. To be born during such times was to be born into a machine built to break you. War has always existed, but there were periods when it consumed everything. Entire civilizations turned into battlefields. Armies did not fight away from cities, they fought through them. Homes became targets, fields became graves. Children learned the sound of screaming before they learned to speak. To be born during total war meant growing up without stability, without safety, without certainty that tomorrow would exist. Ancient and medieval warfare was especially brutal because it lacked restraint. There were no international laws, no human rights conventions, no protection for civilians. When an army captured a city, it was common for every man to be killed, every woman to be raped, every child to be enslaved. This was not considered barbaric, it was strategy. Terror was a weapon. Survival depended entirely on whether your city surrendered quickly enough to be spared, and often even that was not enough. Imagine being born in a city that would one day be erased from history. Not conquered, not defeated, erased. The Mongol invasions of the 13th century are one of the clearest examples of human-made apocalypse. Entire regions lost the majority of their population. Contemporary accounts describe cities where streets were piled with skulls, where rivers ran red, where silence followed devastation so complete that nature reclaimed the ruins. If you were born in the wrong place at the wrong time, your life expectancy could be measured in hours. And yet, even worse than war was slavery, the condition of being born with no ownership over your own body. For thousands of years, millions of humans entered the world already condemned. Their future was decided before they could walk. They would be bought, sold, beaten, worked, bred, and discarded. Their pain was profit. Their lives were tools. Being born into slavery meant that even survival was not your own. You could be killed for disobedience. Your family could be separated at any moment. Your children did not belong to you, they belonged to your owner. Love was dangerous. Attachment was dangerous. Hope itself could become a liability. Slavery did not only destroy bodies, it crushed identity, memory, and dignity. Some of the worst times to be born occurred when slavery, war, and ideology combined. Empires justified brutality through religion, race, or destiny. Entire groups of people were labeled as less than human. Once that line was crossed, anything became possible. Genocide did not require hatred, only dehumanization. The modern world likes to believe that such cruelty belongs to the distant past. But the 20th century proved otherwise. Industrialization did not eliminate suffering, it optimized it. War became faster, deadlier, and more impersonal. Humans learned how to kill not one by one, but by the thousands, the millions. And children were born right into the center of this machinery. Imagine being born during World War I, into a world that believed in progress and reason, only to watch those beliefs drown in mud and blood. Trenches stretched across continents. Poison gas choked soldiers to death. Artillery erased entire battalions in seconds. Civilians starved as economies collapsed. A generation was traumatized beyond repair. Then came World War II, and with it, the most terrifying realization in human history. There is no limit to what humans are capable of doing to each other. Genocide was no longer chaotic. It was bureaucratic. Camps were built. Trains were scheduled. Death was processed like paperwork. To be born into the wrong identity during this time was to live under a permanent death sentence. Children were not spared. They were shot, gassed, starved, experimented on. Some were forced to grow up overnight, hiding in attics, forests, ruins. Others never had the chance. Being born during these years meant that innocence had no value. Survival depended on luck, silence, and invisibility. Totalitarian regimes made existence itself dangerous. A careless word could destroy a family. A rumor could send someone to a camp. Fear became a tool of governance. People learned to mistrust neighbors, friends, even their own thoughts. To be born under such systems meant growing up inside a psychological prison. Perhaps the most horrifying development was the creation of weapons capable of ending humanity itself. Nuclear bombs turned cities into shadows. In seconds, children who had just been born were vaporized. Others lived on, burned, poisoned, and forgotten. For the first time, humans possessed the power to erase entire populations. Instantly, these eras force us to confront a disturbing truth. Some of the worst times to be born were not caused by nature's failure, but by human choice. Suffering was engineered, violence was justified, death was normalized, and still, children were born. Life continued stubbornly, painfully, defiantly, even in hell. But after all this darkness, one question remains. After plagues, famines, wars, slavery, and genocide, was there ever a single moment that truly stands above the rest as the worst time to be born? The answer no one wants to hear. After walking through centuries of hunger, disease, war, slavery, and engineered death, the question returns with more weight than ever. When was the worst time in history to be born as a human? It sounds like a question with a single, sharp answer, a specific century, a named catastrophe, a moment so dark that it eclipses all others. But history refuses to give us that comfort. The truth is far more unsettling. The worst time to be born was not one time. It was most of the time. For the overwhelming majority of human existence, being born meant entering a world that was actively hostile to your survival. Not metaphorically hostile, literally deadly. You were born without protection, without understanding, without rights, and without any guarantee that your life would last long enough to matter. Whether you opened your eyes during an ice age, a famine, a plague, a conquest, a slave economy, or a total war, your chances were shaped almost entirely by forces you could not see, control, or escape. History teaches us something deeply uncomfortable. Suffering was not evenly distributed, but it was incredibly common. Entire generations were sacrificed not for progress, but for circumstance. Millions lived and died without leaving a trace. No name in a record, no marker on a grave, no memory preserved. They were born, they suffered, and they disappeared. And this happened again and again, across continents and centuries, long before the modern world ever existed. What makes this realization so disturbing is how arbitrary it all was. There was no moral order deciding who deserved safety and who deserved pain. Two babies born on the same day, genetically identical, could experience completely opposite realities simply because one was born during peace and the other during collapse. One would grow old surrounded by family. The other would starve, be enslaved, or die young in a war they never chose. History was not fair. It was indifferent. If we try to rank suffering, to decide whether plague was worse than genocide, whether famine was worse than slavery, whether war was worse than disease, we miss the larger truth. These horrors often overlapped. Many humans did not suffer just one of them. They suffered all of them at once. There were moments when hunger weakened bodies, disease finished them, and violence buried what remained. To be born during such times was not just unfortunate. It was catastrophic. And yet, something remarkable happened. Humanity survived, not because life was kind, but because humans adapted, learned, and remembered. Slowly, painfully, knowledge accumulated. People noticed patterns. They learned that clean water mattered, that isolation slowed disease, that cooperation increased survival. Medicine evolved. Science replaced superstition. Laws, however imperfect, began to value human life. Childbirth became safer. Childhood became protected. Survival stopped being a miracle and started becoming an expectation. This is what makes the present moment historically extraordinary. For the first time in human history, most children born today are expected to survive. Not by luck, but by design. Diseases that once wiped out entire civilizations are now preventable, or treatable. Famine, while still tragic where it exists, is no longer an unavoidable natural law. War, though still devastating, is no longer the default state of human society. Slavery is no longer openly accepted as normal. Human life, for the first time, is widely considered valuable by default. This does not mean the modern world is perfect. Far from it. Suffering still exists. Violence still exists. Inequality still exists. But there is a crucial difference between now and most of history. Suffering today is seen as a problem to be solved, not a condition to be accepted. And that difference changes everything. When you understand how bad things once were, the present stops feeling ordinary. You begin to realize that being born today, with access to medicine, information, relative safety, and choice, is not normal in historical terms. It is an anomaly, a rare moment in a long, brutal timeline, a fragile window of progress that could close if forgotten or taken for granted. So perhaps the most honest answer to the question is this. the worst time to be born as a human was any time when you had no protection, no understanding, and no voice. And for most of history, that described almost everyone. The real lesson is not despair. It is responsibility. Because history shows us exactly how easily the world can become unbearable again. How quickly systems collapse. How fast fear turns into violence. How thin the line is between civilization and chaos. Every comfort we have today was built on the suffering of those who never had it. Every safety net exists because generations before us lived without one. To understand the worst times in history is not to glorify suffering, it is to recognize how rare survival with dignity truly is. And how easily it can be lost. If you are alive today, reading these words, you are not just a person living in the present. You are a statistical miracle standing at the far end of humanity's darkest road. Billions walked it before you so that you would not have to.